What's your favorite horror movie?
Scream.
Thing.
Well, The Shining.
The Exorcist.
Exorcist.
Poltergeist.
Get Out.
The Menu.
Barbarian right now.
Horror is a genre that has been explored through many different mediums expanding upon decades. I first discovered horror at a young age by watching children's horror media, such as My Babysitter's a Vampire or Goosebumps. But in 2016, I started getting very intrigued by the genre, watching Watch Mojo countdown videos on horror and Dead Meat, and watching my first horror movie, which was M. Night Shyamalan's Split. I have been enthralled by horror as a genre and every aspect of it. I love all types of horror subgenres and horror video games, as well as TV shows and books. It's just a genre I've come to love and I feel is extremely accepting, showing that making the impossible possible is a concept that I can prove every day with new ideas. In this genre, which started with the film The House of the Devil, and ever since has grown more and more beloved, even once in a while being nominated for Academy Awards, 6 of them even being nominated for Best Picture, such as Get Out and The Exorcist. In this documentary, I will interview people about the ins and outs of this diverse genre, describing the different aspects of making a perfect horror film. Interviews including visual effects artists, writers, directors, and actors, as well as covering the different subgenres of horror and exploring my love and connection to the genre, and discussing the horror short that I made and what went into it. Acting in horror can lead to many different experiences, whether you're playing a killer in a slasher film, or playing an awful realistic depiction of the horrors in reality, or you're the one who the horrific things happen to, or you're the lucky one and you get to be the comedic relief. The actors that I was able to interview came to me with many different perspectives into the genre, proving that being in a horror movie you can still be scared of horror, even if you're the one playing the killer.
Hi, I'm Nathan Basil, and I'm also known as Leslie Vernon.
Your first experience with horror was, or something that freaked you out when you were younger?
Well, I think the first horror movie I saw was Nightmare on Elm Street. I saw 1 and 2 pretty much together one summer, the summer of 1986. I remember the summer. But before that, yeah, I'd seen, look, I'm a scaredy cat.
Yeah.
So I generally try to avoid things that will scare me.
Yeah.
So the scares for me, it didn't require much as a kid, but tended to be stuff that was not really scary.
Since you brought up Nightmare on Elm Street, what it was like working with Robert Englund, and if you were able to kind of style Leslie Vernon off of that, like, horror villain.
He's one of the unusual slashers that has a personality. You know, they're not behind a mask, given the silent treatment. You know, he's out there, and it's very much about his character and his story. Yeah, in that sense, he was a big influence just in really pulling all the stops out. You know, there's nothing that you can't do. You can't take it too far. And he was really supportive about what we were doing too. I mean, he didn't have to do behind the mask. You know, he was doing us the favor. And he thought, well, the script is good. How bad can they screw it up? He just went out on a limb and was pleasantly surprised when he got on location that we were actually, you know, kind of pulling it off from day one. Just a really big fan of what we were doing.
Sitting with your character for a while and make specific choices that weren't in the script?
I think I got an instinct right off the bat from the script because, again, it was just such a clean script and it read so well, so mathematically. I mean, there was no, you know, fat to cut or things that were planted early on that didn't pay off later. Everything was just calculated so perfectly.
How acting for horror is different than working with another genre? Is it more difficult to suspend your disbelief with like a heightened reality?
I don't know. I guess it would depend on the situation. You can have, for example, Behind the Mask was really weird because it was played very earnestly, although the situation was really extreme. I think that turned up the humor of the thing because there was just a really wide gap between how seriously everybody was taking stuff that was utterly absurd.
Did you watch or study any films to help you with your role? I was wondering if you watched anything in preparation for Leslie Vernon.
I tried, I thought, I gotta, watch all these movies that I'm referencing. And then I watched Friday the 13th, and I was like, okay, glad I got that under my belt. Oh, shoot, I'm running out of time. And I was like, you know what? Don't kill yourself, dude. It's all in the script. Just say the words and say them believably, and the script will take care of you. Since then, I felt like, a responsibility to get more of an education. And so I got a lot more films under my belt. But, I didn't have too many back then.
What scares you the most in real life, and does that translate into horror you've watched, or is it a different fear?
Oh yeah, no, horror. I'm a control freak. I'm a massive control freak. So I don't like being scared, and I don't like I went to the Avatar movie, the new Avatar movie, but I did the 4DX thing, with the chairs that move and they're squirting you with crap. And the first time that the chair moved, I freaked out and I shouted out curse words and embarrassed myself because it was like, what are you doing? What are you even doing? So that's what horror movies do for me, is they put me in a situation where I am, by definition, completely out of control. And it's something that is very confronting to me. So it's not something that I avail myself of too often. But when I do, I get it. There's tons of value in surrender, and it's a muscle that I should exercise a whole lot more.
Weirdly enough, Avatar is my biggest fear. So,
Hi, I'm Carla Hatley, and I was in Scream.
Relationship with the horror genre is if you enjoy it.
Genre is pretty. It isn't. I can't see those movies because I'll sit there like this. A little story. When I got called by my agent to go audition for Wes, I went, "Oh, there's just no way. Why would I be in a movie that I couldn't even go see?" I thought about it, and I talked to William, and William said, "Well, think about it." And then I went online and I read an article about him and about his philosophy about the horror genre, and it's pretty tongue-in-cheek.
What was it like being a part of one of the most iconic opening film sequences in horror film? Even though you don't have a lot of experience watching horror films, do you know the notoriety around that scene?
Yeah. Of course, when we were doing it, we had no idea. Yeah. David Booth and I, who played Drew Barrymore's parents, we were just actors, just having fun and being on a set with Wes Craven and watching all the horror makeup being done, and it was just fun. We're out in a vineyard in Healdsburg, and this gorgeous home. Yeah, we had no idea, and we didn't know. We didn't realize until after it opened, and then as it continued through the year, through the first year and the second year and the third year, and we're getting stuff on the internet, and there's people, every time you mention it to somebody, people go, "Oh my God, I love that movie," So yeah, it's been kind of fun to be a part of that iconic opening.
Audition process
for
Scream? What was that like?
Really funny. I went in and I read the scene with somebody, and then I let out the loudest scream I could, and I stopped myself and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, that was so loud." And Wes said, "Oh, it can never be too loud."
Feel about horror comedy as a satire genre, like especially because Scream, I think, was one of the first films that was so self-referential and meta in the horror comedy way.
I think it's a great way to experience it without going so deep into that black hole of being so scared. I like the tongue in cheek. I like the whole idea of the audience knows what's going on. And I think that's the fun part of it.
Do you have any behind the scenes memories from shooting the film?
Well, Wes liked to play tricks or play jokes on his crew. So before we did one take of David and I walking up the house, and before we get to the door, Wes motioned us over and he says, "When you guys get to the door, I want you to turn and I want you to run down the porch and scream as loud as you can and jump off the porch." So we did. And of course, he didn't tell the audio guy, and I think it blew out his ears as we screamed so loud. The other thing that happened was they didn't disconnect the phone. Mm-hmm. So when I pick up the phone, and I just naturally did 911, and we were connected to the fire department, and that stopped production.
My name is Jerry Levine.
Your film, Teen Wolf, married horror and comedy, which has been a subgenre existing back to Abbott and Costello. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on the marriage of the two genres.
Teen Wolf was more of a friendly type of horror genre where the wolf was not as scary, where you don't have to actually bare your teeth, so to speak, is a term that is used, when you want someone to back off of the intensity of the performance or whatever it may be that you're doing, whatever you're executing. Don't bare your teeth so much, don't make it so frighteningly real. Teen Wolf, interestingly enough, the series was, I think, more frightening, psychologically frightening than the original concept movie, a complete departure from it. But Teen Wolf was more of a story about someone who was learning how to come into their own. So it worked on many different levels. It wasn't just about the horror of it.
You've directed a lot of TV shows. And I was wondering if you've worked on any Halloween episodes, and if so, what that was like.
Several Halloween episodes, sure. I directed some Hawaii Five-0 Halloween episodes and other episodes that I can't remember right now, but the ones on 5-0 were particularly gory and psychologically mind-blowing, all kinds of, done a couple of them. Putting people in cages and locking them up in basements and wow, all kinds of stuff. I'm trying to remember. I usually shoot them in early September for a Halloween, and you dress up the street and everything's got to be, 2 months ahead of time.
Do you have any behind the scenes or remember anything from filming Teen Wolf specifically?
Listen, I don't remember. It was a lot of fun riding on the roof of that van all night long to Surfing USA. What could be more fun?
All the actors who I just spoke to were in movies considered in the subgenre of comedic horror, and although they played very different characters, they all served the purpose of the same subgenre, an extremely diverse subgenre that goes back to Abbott and Costello and Frankenstein, to more nuanced variations in Jordan Peele's films. Exploring the genre with the people that I interviewed was a very eye-opening thing to hear. about how they each felt about their individual roles, although horror is not always so funny.
My name is Shannon Mahoney, and I've been working in like the film, television, theatrical industry for since I can really remember, but most likely since I moved to California specifically. I'm not really like a horror fan, but it really comes up with how I define what horror is for me. And for that is, it really is that to me, there's a difference between like scary and horror. And horror screws with me a little bit because I kind of look at it as it is the worst of humanity, like the worst, the horror of humanity. But I look at it as what is the worst circumstance that human being could be compelled to do. And I think we're all capable of horrific tasks. So when we look at, to me, a horrific event or a horror genre, to me, really stems from what brings out the worst in us. And so sometimes that's really difficult for me to watch because I think it's like this is humanity at its worst in the most horrific circumstances committing horrific acts. And so that's why I don't like, when I think about it, I'm like, I like it more when it's like scary or something like Halloween, because I can suspend my disbelief and think, this isn't an actual thing that could happen, or it would be very unlikely. But Beth, who wrote the play and also helped assist on producing the film, and then also was the vision behind it and the filmmaker, I was really hesitant because it's really the horror, the bottom of humanity. Really hesitant to do it. When I auditioned, I was like, this is really rough material, and I want to make sure it's guided in the right hands. And just to give you a little bit of a summary about it, it's Soft and Quiet is far right white supremacists and their beliefs and how they take a situation, manipulate a situation, and proceed with it. To me, the moral of the story, and that was really Beth's vision behind it. These humans are treated so horribly. You can imagine it's almost like somebody is pressing their knee on their neck and they cannot breathe and they are dying. And what, metaphorically, what happens if they were able to rise up and come back? And that's the last image of the scene, not to spoil it, but that was her messaging behind that. And hearing that message, I was excited to do the film because to me, it wasn't just about a horrific act being disgusting and despicable, but what if we see this redemption, we see this drive behind that, and what would that do?
Wanting to be like a female horror creator, was wondering what it's like to be in a female-centric kind of film and creation area and what that was like.
Neely, that you asked me, that gives me chills. It was the best part of it. It was and I'm sure it has something to do with coming off of the pandemic, you know, and we're masking. I think it was the first time I was really in a group setting where I hadn't been masked. I mean, we're testing every day and we're submitting our tests, you know, that being in that female-inspired, female-led, really female-dominated cast, that energy was amazing. She really approached it in a very feminine way, in the sense that she sat down, we sat in a circle, we talked about how we connected, and, you know, women do that. Men, I find that in films that I've done that were driven by men, really it's get the business done. We don't need to talk too much character. We're good to go. She really like sat us down and talked about how we were doing. She really worked on relationships and connecting. That trust, I think she built that by not separating herself, but by just sitting there with us. It was everything. I'm just excited for the future of film and to see, you know, will we even call it that word anymore? You know, the future of what our looks like is going to be really exciting. I continue to marvel and think it's very interesting that depending on how society is doing is how we trend. You know, we went through a real zombie phase, and they tie that to the economy and why we tend to lean towards this genre or this direction. So I'm excited to see that what kind of films come out after the pandemic and then post-pandemic, and see how we continue to evolve as a society and how this type of film reflects where we're at as a world.
Hello, my name is Devin Valdez. I am an actor from Sacramento, and I am a horror enthusiast. Horror to me, I mean, I think it's awesome. It's this awesome genre of, literature and film, cinema, art, TV, now even like video games. That's like scary and meant to startle you or maybe repulse you or just give you like a sense of dread.
Did you have like a thing that really freaked you out when you were younger that you were scared of, that you remember being like, okay, I want to stay away from this?
I think when I was younger, anything like any kind of literature or film that was about like possession used to like freak me out. Because then, a lot of horror that's like slasher or killer based, if you can fight it to the best of your ability, you might have a chance. But if it's within you.
What subgenre out of the many subgenres of horror do you find the most interesting, or what have you like become akin to out of the different genres?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I think I've always loved monster movies, and I love killer movies, like the slasher, all of those subgenres. Zombies are some of my favorite things. But I think as someone who now can look at horror as not just something fun to watch or like take in, it's like an art form. I think that like psychological horror is really interesting, because to take that and create tension for your audience or your reader or whatever, it's for, is I think really impressive. And the routes in which you can take that, because something about our psyche is so much, I think, more challenging in some ways to like get into and get scary about, but then it can also, that payoff can be really, really cool.
What is your connection with horror, and what have you created involving horror?
I've always been a horror fan. What I've done personally is in college, I got to do a couple student films that were like horror based, and those are always fun. So I played like a zombie housewife, which is just as kind of silly as it sounds, but it was also pretty fun, to tell that story. And the most recent thing I worked on was with Wolfcat Films, and they did the Christmas tapes. So it's like found footage Christmas horror movie, and that was really fun because it's taking two very different genres and like doing something pretty unique with it. And I think the found footage, as cheesy as it can be, there is still like a sense of terror you can build with that. And so that was really fun to kind of get to work on that. Personally, I really want to write a film. I have so many ideas, and working with my partner on our scripts, and we're really interested in seeing if that's something that could be produced here in Sacramento, because I think that's definitely possible. And then honestly, I just want to be a scream queen one day. I really just want to like write myself a role where I can just have one like nice death scene, all bloody and gory. And even if it's like the 5-second person in the beginning, that just sets the tone. I just want to be a scream queen.
How do you feel about people that don't like horror because it's too scary for them?
I try to, I always want to respect everyone's threshold, but immediately what I will do when someone says that horror as a genre scares them and they don't like it is I try to suggest things that aren't as like, there's like a spectrum. So it's like, I'm not going to tell them to watch like The Conjuring or like Poltergeist or like things that are like classic, super scary, But I might be like, there's some, like what scares you about horror? Is it like the blood and guts and like scary ghosts, or because you can kind of lean towards the side that's a little more like sci-fi or psychological or just thriller, where it kind of gets your heart racing. And so I usually start by just suggesting titles that I don't think are as scary. But if they're really adamant, like I try to understand, because art is subjective, and so it's okay for some people to not like it. But I do like immediately try to start suggesting things that I'm like, this one's not so bad. Just try it. It's fun to be a little scared and a little tense.
The actors that were in the clips that I just played happen to be in a more serious-toned horror films, although having bits of dark comedy as well as satire throughout. They remain more in the horrific realm of horror, whether that be for the reasons of insanely gruesome sadistic people or a more campy look at it still showing the awful side of humanity in a lighter way. In both mediums, horror is presented to show heightened versions of people living in the world. The next aspect of horror that I will be diving into is the writer's perspective. I spoke with a college professor who is a screenwriter about what it's like to be a horror fan and to work on the horror genre, as well as how that love for horror is displayed with his students in the class. He also brought up some really interesting stories about working in the horror industry and being subjected to some iconic horror movie scenes, whether that be seeing them being created on the lot or seeing them in the movie theater.
There I am.
Hi.
Hello. You're there. Oh,
Honestly, that's terrifying.
everything I know and do about being a good husband and being a good father, I've learned from The Shining. I've written horror that has not been produced, which is typical for most people that do screenwriting, that I think would truthfully fall into the horror genre that's been produced. Is I wrote a bunch of movies many years ago for Roger Corman, brought in to write a sequel to his movie Unborn. So I wrote the sequel. He didn't like the title that I had suggested. I wrote it under the title Unborn Again. I wrote a number of films for him, but the only true horror I've ever written that's been produced would have been, I guess, the sequel to Unborn for Roger Corman.
Do you have any experience or remember anything about writing Unborn 2?
I remember we had a newborn baby in the house. I needed the money. He offered me the job. I actually really enjoyed writing it. I don't much like the movie. No, in fact, I don't even admit to writing it unless someone like corners me.
I made a horror movie about a baby. So, yeah. First experience with horror.
It began with Psycho, in a serious sort of way. The genre really spoke to me, and it still does. If something frightens me, because I've gotten so jaded, in all these years. But if something truly frightens me, it's like a wow moment for me. Horror, historically and still to this day, is the most commercially successful genre.
How your experience working with film and television has prepared you for working with your students?
I have very little experience in television. My experience has all been feature film related. Fully tenured associate professor of screenwriting. Everything that I bring into the classroom is based on my own personal experiences. Although I have written a very successful how-to book on screenwriting, the cover endorsement was made by Wes Craven, wonderful guy. The only writing classes or film classes that I've ever been in are the ones that I teach. What I bring to my students is based on real-world experience. Have you seen Cabin in the Woods?
I have. I love Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, I highly recommend that movie to anybody and everybody who's interested in the actual genre of horror, because Cabin in the Woods kind of explains it all. One that you might appreciate. I'll have to share a story with you.
Okay.
If you got the time and the patience. And I discussed this with Wes Craven when I thanked him for endorsing my book. A friend that I made early on, I was a production assistant for Francis Coppola as my first job in Hollywood. Became friendly with the special effects guy there who invited me to see some of his work. And of course, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
And you remember the scene when the bed swallows the girl, chews her up, and then spits out her blood in a geyser? So my friend Jim Doyle, who was a special effects guy, invited me to the set the day that they shot that scene because he created the effect for it, and he wanted me to see it. The way that shot was done, the camera and the bed were all bolted to the floor. A sack filled with stage blood was strategically placed under the bed, and the room was designed to rotate. This was before there was any capability of doing this kind of stuff with computers. This was like pre-computer stuff. This was a long time ago, where all the effects were on camera. Took a lot more creativity and imagination to pull off things. But it was bolted to the floor, and the room was designed to rotate with the camera bolted to the floor and the DP and the director and the chairs bolted to the floor next to them. So the way the scene was staged is that the actress gets into bed, the bed opens up, and she falls through a little indenture and hole in the bed that's been created, as if swallowed.
Yeah.
The room then rotates with the camera in place, so there's no clear sense of the rotation on screen. but the room rotates until the bed is actually upside down. They released the cover of the bag, and the blood poured out. It created the illusion of the blood shooting up as a geyser. What was going to capture this ton of stage blood pouring out of the bed? Craven is upside down next to the camera when they trigger the release of the blood, because he's got to maintain the point of view as director to make sure it goes well. They release the blood totally out of control. It hit the electric booths on the sound stage, and the stage shorted out and went into pitch black. No one can even see to find a flashlight. And this is going on what seems like a long time until finally you hear a very squeaky voice, and it's Wes Craven upside down going, "Somebody get me out of here!"
I next wanted to delve into the visual aspects of the horror genre, which I find to be a very riveting part of the process. For most of the practical effects used in some of the great horror films today wouldn't have been possible without this very aspect. Before the time of CGI, a lot of 80s horror films specifically relied on this. That is where Randy came in. Randy worked on very famous films such as Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and E.T., but today I'm focusing on the horror films she was able to work on, which are Poltergeist and Gremlins, two very beloved films to my childhood, and probably yours. Self-titled gateway horror films, letting people into the genre at a very young age. I talked to Randy about what it was like creating some of the iconic visual effects in both of those films.
Hi, my name is Randy Ottenberg. Worked for Lucasfilm 28 years. I worked with various other companies, Right Stuff, and then when we worked on Gremlins, I was working for Chris Wallace.
What was the evolution like of building upon the designs for Gremlins throughout the transformation of designing them?
I wasn't in on the designing of them. I don't want to say something. I was at Industrial Light and Magic working, and we were making models, and I can get it. My first movies were E.T. and Poltergeist, and then it started to get into Revenge of the Jedi at the time. But I left that company, hard to believe, and I went over to work with Chris Wallace on Gremlins, and it was a really new shop, and there was a lot of horror just in the shop, I'll have to tell you. I wasn't in on the design. I did mostly, I probably did 25 background puppets for them. And we just thought the story was like, kind of so much like It's a Wonderful Life when we were filming it. I wasn't, I had such a kind of tough time on the show for various reasons. I mean, the crew was, that was when it came into like, I didn't let them pick on me. It was just a tough show. I mean, I thought I wanted to get into complete creature design at the time, but someone that, very masterful, I think it was Tony McVeigh, did the original sculpt that we casted everything from. And they were great sculptors. I think I was painting the Gremlins. It was too much of a good old boy shop. It was tough. It was all practical at the time. There's no computers, so it was really fun. I always liked puppets. So, I did puppets ever since I was a kid. Cardboard boxes, made my own puppets. So it was very much like that. Enjoyed when we cast the faces, put, little strings, on the eyes and, animate them that way. And then you'd puppeteer, which it was fun.
What was it like working on Poltergeist, and what specifically did you create in the film?
Poltergeist, again, I went in, and they started us on 2 movies. At the time, later on in my career, you used to be assigned a movie. I would have been assigned, we were doing Poltergeist, Star Trek, and E.T., which wasn't called E.T. then, it was called A Boy's Life. So I ended up jumping. One day I do Poltergeist, one day I do E.T. I ended up with a credit on E.T. because they didn't put credits on both. But Poltergeist, I worked on the tree that and that's actually my model, the one that zooms up. And that was like my first completely 100% on-screen model that I did. So I haven't seen it for a number of years, but I found that movie really scary. The other thing we did on Poltergeist, which was really kind of fun, probably poisoned all Marin County, we would use this stuff called glow juice. It's in your necklaces and Put that in this big water tank. We called it the cloud tank. That's originally how they made clouds. I think they built the cloud tank for Star Wars, a couple of scenes, and they mixed the water with like an oil and they would make beautiful clouds, and that's how they would do clouds. So we decided to use it for Poltergeist, scary ghost puppet, the one that was kind of white that came out of the TV. That was like a marionette, and we did that in the cloud tank, so the water would make it spooky. And Poltergeist was great. It had a lot of good stuff in it. I didn't work on the mummies that came out of the swimming pool, the skeletons, but a very scary movie.
What the process is like of working with visual effects and how it differentiates per film in how much you have to do for it.
I think the difference is, the film basically is shot already. They really aren't doing the live action. You have the live action already in place. You get to see very little of it, or you did at the time. Then they're inserting the shots. So some of it's like you're flying, you're not contributing that much to the story. You're going to, a lot of times, it's experimental, like in Poltergeist, and they just know what effects they want. So you're it's post-production, basically. You're not involved in any you're pre-production for special effects, but you're not involved in a storyline or coming up with anything. And you don't have the script. They don't, I've never read a script.
If you could make a horror movie about something that you're scared of, what would it be about?
I think that scene that they cut out in War of the Worlds, I think just like a kid being in their bedroom, and people always picture things underneath their bed, but I always, and I was always just looked at tree. It was urban. I grew up in the city, but, just scary, I think almost anything could be scary.
Taking a step away from the film aspect of horror, horror can be displayed in many different mediums, whether that be literature, video games, or even musical theater. I had the pleasure of seeing a stage production of Carrie the Musical at Sacramento Theater Company in February of 2022. Through that, I met one of my best friends, and it was directed by somebody who I had known for a while and also wanted to speak to about this untold aspect of horror. I discussed with McKenna Alt and Connor Makowitz what it's like taking an originally literary adaptation turned film and now turned musical and bringing it to life. I further asked questions on their opinions on the genre.
I'm McKenna Alt. I am a student in Sacramento, and I'm also an actor.
My name is Connor Mikowitz, and I am a theater director and actor in town.
What is horror as a genre to you?
It's a mystery to me that I'm really just starting to explore, because I'm so hesitant to watch movies with gore, and even the ones that I do see, I need to be able to pull myself out of it really quickly until I can feel that the moment has passed. So I am curious about the horror genre.
I feel like when a lot of people think of horror, they think of like gore and like blood and death and all that stuff. But that stuff doesn't like bother me. It doesn't scare me. What scares me is films that, I guess, like, to me, horror, especially like in the film world, is movies that make you think thoughts that are unconventional, or make you think about things that are controversial and scary.
I may amend my definition of horror now and make it a little more personal, since I do have such limited experience with it. But I am approaching it through a queer, almost camp lens, knowing that, one, it makes me feel safer knowing that I am not a part of the gore and all of that, and I can remove myself. But these characters, and I mean, you talk about like they're marginalized characters, and so that's why a lot of marginalized people may gravitate towards the horror genre for the underdog element, or being excised from the community. So a lot of them turn into camp, whether intentionally or not, and I don't know if that's a whole other sub genre, Neely, of
Megan.
I mean, I guess you said comedy, but that I'm able to appreciate them like Megan, and like Megan for extreme like gay camp purposes, but and for the Menu for like appreciating the satire behind it and the outrageousness that the genre of horror can provide that maybe other types of films can't. Like they can explore things.
What was it like adapting a film into a stage play musical, even though it wasn't your original idea? What was it like taking it from page to stage?
I was first aware of Carrie, the original musical, and just knowing that it was a major flop on Broadway, and it was just very famous, that, and something that we would all kind of study up on and know like who had a bootleg recording of it. And like the first recording I ever heard was in high school, and it was on a cassette tape. So that's how I listened to Carrie the first time. Sharing clips of it was extremely rare, so it seemed like a treat. When I first knew about the musical, I knew that they had made major revisions, and everyone was waiting for Carrie to come up again. I was familiar with the book, didn't ever read it until we did our production of Carrie. I had watched the film probably not until college, but kind of did it for like, I'm supposed to watch Carrie. I'm supposed to know the cultural references in Carrie if I'm going to survive in this world. So it was almost like watching it like homework, and it's a great film. So adapting it, I was a little, it was difficult to go from the movie and then the original production, which was so grand and over the top. It was like, it treated the piece like an opera, which is how I think like, possibly if there are going to be adaptations of horror onto the stage and a musical theater, that it does need to get that heightened. And I felt like the off-Broadway revival shrank it down and tried to make it so realistic and human that I feel like the impact of the author's original intent, whether you're reading his novel, or if you see the movie version, that they accomplished that. I don't feel like the off-Broadway production was really able to accomplish the horror of it. Try to find ways to bring the grandness of the movie and the original flop and try to infuse that into the production whenever. And I don't really know, what worked and what didn't, but that was an exciting way to treat the piece.
How does it feel to fill the shoes of such an iconic horror character?
It was great. Carrie the Musical has been like a weird part of my life for like some time. I used to love this theater YouTuber, and Catherine Steele, she did a production of Carrie with someone who is now my friend, Julia Lester, did Carrie, and she played Carrie. And so that's how I first kind of like knew of the musical. I'd never seen the movie. I never read the book. But I had listened to the off-Broadway cast recording and was immediately like, this is a role that I want to do. So when I found out that our theater company was doing it, I was like, okay, this is my goal, is to be Carrie. Like, I'm going to do what I need to do, and I'm going to put the work in that I need to do to, get this role, hopefully. So getting it was a really cool thing for me because it had been a dream role. Kind of after a while, I was like, okay, this is like an iconic role. So there's work I need to put in. I did the work to get the role, but now I need to do the work to like almost earn the role. Read the book. I watched there's 3 movies. There's the 70s, the one in Sissy Spacek one. There's the Chloe Grace Moretz one, and then there's another one. I remember just trying to like look at, all of the actors who played Carrie and just try to find like little things that I liked and things that I was like, this is not happening. This isn't what I'm going to use. And then obviously also kind of put my own things and my own ideas into the role. And I like to think that it was successful.
Because Carrie herself is kind of murderous at the end. Who do you feel the villain of the story is? And from the perspective of your character and the perspective of you?
Oh, I think in Carrie's eyes, the villain is everyone. She's very much like a victim in her eyes. And I mean, yes, she is, she experienced, abuse and bullying. And obviously she is a victim, but it was very much like it's me against the world. As an outside perspective, that wasn't necessarily true. it wasn't Carrie versus the world. Like, you know, there was people. In my eyes, Carrie wasn't the villain. It was a combination of religion and, you know, her mom and bullying and society. But I also think she didn't need to kill everyone.
So while directing, what did you use to add your own flair to the piece of Carrie?
I think I can be pretty successful with my background in directing on such a low budget, being able to strip things down and work with as minimal props and scenery as possible and trust that the actors can fill in everything for the audience. So besides the blood, which I was happy that we attempted, we went for all blood. And I'm proud that we did that, but that we didn't need any of the other excess. And working without excess is something that I like. I think it's more fun. It's more fun for me. It's hopefully more fun for the actors when we're working. It makes it a little bit more collaborative. And hopefully it's more fun for the audience because it makes them not tune out as much. Like there's a little bit of surprise in the emptiness.
I've always wanted to have a part in that genre in some way, and finally got that opportunity in October of 2022. I was asked to make a horror film for my class. My friends and I made a short film called Earth to Marry. That was about an alien that came out of my head. And although that concept is outlandish and seemed impossible to shoot, we made it happen. And that's something that I think horror does in such an exceptional way. If you have an idea and you think it's something that could never be done, it can be. That's what I've learned from the experience of making that short film. It turned out goofy and stupid, but I have so much love for it. I think it exemplifies what I want to do when I'm older with film, showing that making the impossible possible is a concept that I can prove every day with new ideas. So as horror grows in wondrous, diverse ways, I will be there with a bucket of popcorn, seeing what will come next of my favorite genre.
When you were here before, couldn't look you in the eye. You're just like an angel. Your skin makes me cry. You float like a feather in a beautiful world. I wish I was special. You're so very special, but I'm a creep.